Lachlan, listening to his parents' voices for the first time as he was being fitted with a hearing aid.
First hearing aid with sound.
Hello, darling. Hello, Lachlan. There we go. Well, hello. Darling. Oh.
The video shows baby Lachlan clearly mesmerised at being able to hear. He smiles, an endearing, lopsided grin as he's cradled in the arms of his emotional mother. In an interview with the BBC after the video went viral, his mother Michelle said that Lachlan would probably have to wear hearing aids for the rest of his life unless new research comes about that will make that unnecessary, which is where Bionics comes in. Bionics has the potential to restore Lachlan's hearing for good. It's a technology that's being mainly publicly funded at the moment, but it's advancing in leaps and bounds. In a moment, how it works and where it might lead, both culturally and business-wise. But first, a year ago, a hospital in England announced that it had performed what some would consider a miracle straight out of the Bible, restoring sight to the blind. And they did it using electronic implants. Business Daily's Lawrence Knight went along to find out more.
I'm in one of the wide and many corridors of the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, and I'm standing outside a set of double doors, and next to it's a purple sign that says theatres. I'm going through. Just around the corner there's another set of double doors. It says danger laser radiation. Now, I can't go through these doors because that's where the actual surgery takes place. In this part of the hospital, they work in neurology, which includes working on the retina and the optic nerve at the back of the eye. And I've come here to speak to a man who does some rather special eye surgery in the theatre right behind these doors.
The patients we're operating on have got scar tissue on the retina, which is a bit like the film at the back of a camera. It's the part of the eye that captures the image. Operations inside the eye.
And we're here in your office, and the first thing I see just across on your windowsill is a model of an eye. Okay, so it's about twice the size of the normal eye.
So I'm lifting off the top half of the eye, which is the white of the eye, and we've got in the very middle this transparent sphere, which is called the vitreous body. It's like a jelly in a trifle, and quite often when we do the operations, we have to remove the jelly first of all in order to get access to the retina. The instruments are designed to go through tiny slits in the wall of the eye that are less than 1 millimetre thick, just behind the iris, and then when the patient is lying down on the table looking up, we look into the eye with an operating microscope, so we can actually see everything that's going on inside the eye.
Now, what you're trying to do here is basically to put a chip, is it, at the back of the eye to replace the retina?
Correct. So the retina has got two layers. One is where all the nerves are, and the other layer contains the light-sensing cells. So what we're trying to do with the electronic retina is to replace the photoreceptor cells with the electronic chip, which basically does the same thing. It's got 1600 pixels, which are stimulated by the light, and then the chip has an electrode in each of those pixels, which then sends us electrical signal back to the retina, and then along the optic nerve to the brain, and then the human brain perceives the image. When we activate the chip and they can see again, of course it's fantastic, and I'm really privileged to be involved with doing it.
Oh my God!
Spot on.
I got it!
There you go.
Honest to God, I felt like Christmas Day.
That's the voice of Rian Lewis, as she was able to read the time on a clock for the first time following surgery a year ago. She suffers from retinitis pigmentosa, a genetic disease that affects 1 in every 4,000 people, leading to progressive loss of eyesight. Rian said she hadn't been able to see what her 2 children looked like for 8 years, until the surgery changed all that.
You're not completely helpless, that you can actually find an edge of a wall, and it's, I really can't put it into words. I just felt elated.
Now, the chips that you're implanting, where do they come from?
The company that makes them is Retina Implant, which is a German company in Reutlingen.
Do you have one we can have a look at?
I'll have to show you a picture.
Oh, we don't have one here.
They cost £100,000 each.
Oh, okay, so they have to be handled carefully. You've turned your computer screen here. You pull up an image. It's a dark, blackish red colour with, I guess, veins going across. That's the retina, presumably.
That's the retina.
And then streaking across in front. a yellowish streak with a square at the end, which I'm guessing is the chip that you implanted.
Yes, it only restores vision where the chip is placed, and the chip is only in the very centre of the eye. Now, one of the important things to realise, of course, is that we don't have the ability to relay information about colour. The patients describe it as a grainy image where they can see movement more like shadows moving around.
Like on very old black and white television.
Exactly, and in fact that's the analogy I always give because, of course, it implies that technology will get better. Something even better just to look forward to.
And it's not just the quality of the image that he expects to improve. The operation is still cumbersome, lasting 8 hours. And the chip is currently only expected to last about 5 years inside the human body before needing replacing. But even with these shortcomings, Professor McLaren says there are already signs that bionic eyes could eventually go beyond merely restoring normal human vision.
Because one of our patients said that she could see a different colour of her kettle when it's hot compared to when it's cold.
So you're picking up some infrared there, isn't
Well, yes, I mean, we assume that the spectrum of light of the chip is the same as the normal human eye, but of course it's not. You know, you could widen that spectrum and get all sorts of things, but most people really just want to be able to see which direction to walk in, and we can do that with the chip already.
Professor Robert McLaren of the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, speaking there to Lawrence Knight. It's not just bionic eyes. Electronic cochlear implants are also restoring hearing to the deaf. And it's conceivable that soon the paralysed could even regain the ability to walk. Professor John Donoghue of the Wyss Centre for Bio and Neuroengineering in Geneva, Switzerland, is a leading researcher in the field of human-brain-computer interfaces. In other words, chips that enable a computer to listen to your thoughts.
One of the most common applications is to help people who are unable to move at all to read out their thoughts and to use that signal from their brain to communicate with the world. In one of the studies we published, a lady who had been paralyzed completely for more than a decade used a robotic arm to reach out and grab her morning coffee and for the first time in a decade serve herself her morning coffee.
It sounds like magic. How on earth does it work?
Well, in your brain you have billions of neurons. The region that controls your arm is a sort of thumb-sized region that we can put a small microelectrode array. That's a bunch of hair-thin little probes that sit just on top of the brain and penetrate into it. They pick up tiny electrical impulses, and these impulses are kind of like listening into a foreign language. You don't understand it, but if you have an interpreter, you can make sense out of it. And over the past 50 years or so, we've learned crudely to read out your brain. Now, the brain is plastic, that is, it can actually change to accommodate the kinds of signals that are coming out. So, for example, supposing you're controlling a robotic arm and trying to pick up a cup and it's very clumsy. If you practice that, then your brain can begin to change and learn how to use the apparatus.
But as you say, it's quite crude at the moment. Are you predicting that things will advance quite rapidly from here on? Could it start reading more complex thoughts?
That's a good question. There are mysteries about how the brain codes very rich, complex kinds of information. You know, your thoughts about planning a story. We have no idea how that might be organized in your brain. We do know it's spread out over a large part of your brain, so we would have to have sensors in multiple areas all over your brain, and that, I think, is a big barrier to entry.
To what extent, for this kind of technology to really advance rapidly, would you need to understand the brain better? Because at the moment, we don't even really know what consciousness is.
Better neuroscience would be very useful. We would get better control of, say, a prosthetic arm or even your own arm for a paralyzed person. But the second part is, if you see the current technology, it really looks like something in a laboratory. There's a plug that connects the electrode in the brain to the outside world. There's a big cart of electronics. What we really need is the ability to put a radio inside your head that would communicate these signals to the outside world. That's something we're working on. We're building the most sophisticated brain communicator in the world, something that can take huge amounts of conversation going on in the brain and pipe it to the outside, where someday a smartphone-sized technology would interpret that and communicate it to a robotic arm. So we're working on that at the Wyss Centre, and that requires industry engineers working with neuroscientists to come up with the right kind of computers and electronics.
Is there a lot of private sector involved in this research?
Currently, no. The Wyss Centre is taking these ideas at the laboratory level and trying kinds of medical devices would say we want to produce this for the general population. Most of this research is funded in the U.S. There are U.S. government agencies like the National Institutes of Health. In addition, DARPA, the U.S. Defense Department Advanced Research Program, has been funding this kind of research specifically so that you would have brain control over a prosthetic limb for people who've lost their limbs in wars.
But surely, at some point, this kind of technology could be used to make people without disability be almost superhuman.
So there's already technology that's being commercialized like that. Even some of the toys and games where you can put a little cap on your head and you can sort of control a computer cursor, you can play a video game. Others are trying to use that same kind of signal for healthcare applications as well, and those companies are emerging as we speak.
Can you see a day when everyone will have a probe at the bottom of their head?
The Matrix. I'm as adventurous as anybody about these things, and I think the day when you go off and have a probe stuck in your head is still quite a ways off.
Professor John Donoghue. You're listening to Business Daily from the BBC with me, Manuela Saragossa. Well, where could all this be leading? Ramez Nam is a former Microsoft executive turned science fiction novelist. His award-winning Nexus trilogy of books explores the idea that in the future, the distinction between what is human and what is machine may become ever more blurred. It's a concept that many refer to as transhumanism, although Ramez Nam is not a fan of that particular label.
Well, I actually hate the word transhumanism, but it's basically the idea that we can use technology to improve on the human condition, to give ourselves longer lives or greater intelligence. The reason I don't like the word is I think anyone that has a smartphone is effectively a transhumanist.
In what way are they a transhumanist?
Well, we have this ability now to project our thoughts or to look at the eyes of someone else across the planet instantaneously. You're in London, I'm in Seattle. We're talking instantaneously. I have a huge amount of memory of phone numbers, for instance, in my device. I can ask Wikipedia at any point. So this is all augmentation of our abilities that our ancestors would have thought were the powers of gods.
So you're not taking a particularly dystopian view, because a lot of people who write novels about the future tend to take a dystopian view.
Well, I'm a little guilty in my novels. I'm an optimist, but of course I fill my novels with some very terrible things happening to amp up the tension and keep the reader turning the page. And bad things will happen. Cars cause some bad things. The internet allows child pornography to flourish or hate groups to organize. But when we step back, the on-net technology has done much more good than bad for us.
I have to say, you are a former Microsoft executive. You would give it a positive slant. But there are lots of people out there who don't share your enthusiasm for technology, especially when it comes to social relations.
Well, I think there are challenges. I think, I just had a conversation with some people about their kids looking at their phones all the time. But their kids are not being antisocial. They're actually being hypersocial. They're socializing with 5 or 6 other people at the same time. They're not feeling alienated. They're actually feeling connected.
Synthetic, isn't it? It's synthetic.
Oh, well, so is our clothing. So is the room that I'm in. So is my car. Yeah, we're happy to have these things. When we look at how technology gets used, it gets used to fill our basic human desires. We have a human desire to connect. And so we use this technology to connect to other people. Does it fully replace interacting in person? No. But I can keep track of friends thousands of miles away, and that is far more connection than I had with those people prior to the arrival of technology.
As a novel writer, what do you look at now and think that's inspirational, that would drive you to put it in a narrative?
Well, I see that, for instance, with this brain technology, we're looking at people who've had damage to their memory from a blow to the head, and we're trying to commercialize now technology that we can implant in the brain that will restore the ability to learn. And if we can do that, then we'll probably gain the ability to make memories better than they are. In mice or rats, they've done these experiments where they can use a memory chip in the brain, they can have the rat run a maze,